Welcome to the webinar hosted by the Earth Exchange Forum. Today's webinar is related to the upcoming changes to soil relocation in British Columbia, presented by Travis Deeter. Our objective here today is to cover the problems with the current soil relocation regime, address what is changing and the proposed new changes by the government, and who does this apply to. And we're super excited to have Travis Deeter here with us today to share this information with us and also shed some light on what could be changing. Travis has over 18 years experience working in contaminated sites, including residential, commercial, and industrial sites within BC, Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. He has been involved in large infrastructure projects, chemical spill cleanups, large-scale developments, environmental monitoring programs, and numerous transactional due diligence investigations, many of which have resulted in obtaining Ministry of Environment regulatory instruments. Travis has also successfully assisted clients in relocating large volumes of soil during site improvement and development projects. He is also a numerical standard specialist with the Society of Contaminated Sites Approved Professionals of BC. Today's webinar is sponsored by PhilConnect. PhilConnect is the dirt exchange platform for the construction and landscaping industries, where where users can buy, sell, or exchange material with nearby project sites. So if you have extra fill or you need fill for your project sites, you can connect and collaborate on PhilConnect with other users. You can view nearby sites, certified dump sites, and contaminated soil facilities on an easy-to-use interactive map. You can filter by location, quantity, and type of fill with a click of a button. And you can also download supporting permits and test results before negotiating any deals. This webinar is also sponsored by Thurber Engineering. Thurber provides geotechnical, environmental, and materials engineering and testing services on a wide variety of projects for numerous industries across Canada. Thurber Engineering has multiple office locations, and Travis is coming to us today from the Vancouver office. On the call today, we also have with us Mana Arabi, CEO and co-founder of PhilConnect. As a civil engineer with over 20 years of experience, Mana has worked on many private and public projects in Canada and the United States for prominent companies such as Dragados, SNC-Lavalin, Norland Limited, Lafarge, and Eurovia, and as well as myself, Huayda Carter, co-founder of PhilConnect, and I'll be your moderator today. So now we're ready over to pass the presentation to Travis. Travis, please take over and walk us through some of the upcoming changes to soil relocation in British Columbia.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Huayda. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. So today we're discussing the changes to soil relocation coming to British Columbia, and they will be province-wide changes that are coming. So all the information that is going to be presented here today is coming from the draft, and I stress draft, intentions paper called Regulating Soil Relocation, displayed there. And if you want to read it for yourself, I do recommend it. There's a lot of information in there, and we'll just be kind of highlighting the most important aspects of that today. And there's the website, but even if you just Google Regulating Soil Relocation, I'm sure you can find that paper quite easily. So, problems with the current regime, and I'd just like to stress here, these are not problems I'm saying are problems. These are problems that the ministry has identified with the current regime. So at this point, the current regime only regulates contaminated soil. There is no provincial process for regulating the relocation of uncontaminated soil. That's dealt with through existing municipal bylaws, and of course many cities do already have processes in place for regulating the movement of soil that is not contaminated. But where contaminated soil does need to be moved, the process is unclear, complex, lengthy, usually results in a lot of soil going to landfills that maybe could have been dealt with otherwise, and also I guess some soil is being moved outside of regulatory requirements. Some of you may be familiar with contaminated soil relocation agreements, which is the main tool for moving contaminated soil if you're not sending it straight to a treatment facility. Those are now going to be phased out. Those will not be issued anymore. They were used extremely rarely to begin with because they were quite unclear and complex and took quite a while to get approved. So they're just not going to be used anymore, and there are going to be other uses, other tools to use to deal with contaminated soil. Next slide. There we go. So what's changing? As I mentioned, replacing the contaminated soil relocation agreements with tools such as waste discharge authorizations and approvals in principle. But the big things that we're here to talk about today are what's changing for uncontaminated soil. And that is, we are adding a brand new notification requirement for uncontaminated soil movement if it meets certain triggers. Creating a new class of fill site termed high volume receiving sites. And there are now going to be enforcement tools for the movement of uncontaminated soil if you don't follow the rules. So the key proposed changes all hinge on a couple of definitions. So what is uncontaminated soil? Well, there it is, but it's basically soil from land on which commercial or industrial uses, and those commercial or industrial uses are defined in Schedule 2 of the CSR, and only those commercial or industrial uses are being considered here. So if you have soil that meets the land uses of those sites, then you are going to be captured under this system when you want to relocate soil. So then that trigger, the amount is 10 or more cubic meters of soil. So not very much, and we expect that even modest development projects will be captured under this, this new regime. So as part of this new regime, you will now have to provide proof that you have analyzed soil coming from the source site and determined its quality. And then if you meet the standards at your source site, therefore you're not deemed contaminated, then you would proceed through the rest of this process. If you are contaminated, then you're not following this process and you're basically using existing processes that you would normally use, which is typically sending it to a landfill, or if you're not going to relocate it, then you would just leave it on site and try and treat that under a risk management scenario. So as I mentioned, if you meet the standards, you're going to enter into this notification system. And the first step of that is to complete the form, which we'll talk about in a minute. At that point, that form will then be circulated to two primary entities, one being municipalities, and that would be a municipality from both the source site as well as the receiving site where the soil is going, and also any indigenous nations with reserve or traditional territories that are captured within either the source or receiving sites. And you'll have to submit that notice to those entities at least 2 weeks prior to the movement of the soil. Then those notices will then be put up onto the contaminated site registry as well. So that will be publicly available information at that point. And then additional proposed provisions relate to vapor analysis, high volume receiving sites, some exemptions, which we will also discuss in the presentation. So here is your nice flow chart for how to determine when you're going to have to file one of these notifications. So we start at the top. You want to remove some soil. Do you have a commercial and industrial activity, and are you moving greater than 10 cubic meters? If your answer is no, then you're out of the process right at the start. If your answer is yes, you move on to conducting soil analysis and then determine what your standards are and whether you exceed those. And if you do exceed the standards, then again, you're kind of kicked out of this process and you're dealing with your contamination under existing regulations. If you do not exceed, then you're going and determining what fill site can I send this to. And then as you can see there's a trigger of 20,000 cubic meters. That refers to a high volume receiving site. We'll get into that a bit more. And then you're sending it on to the ministry. Sorry, I forgot to mention, of course, this is going to the ministry as well as municipalities and First Nations, up to 2 weeks or a minimum of 2 weeks prior to shipping that soil. So what does this notification consist of? Well, right now we don't have an actual form to look at or discuss, but we do know the initial draft contents that the ministry is expecting to put into that form. So that will include source and receiving site addresses and legal descriptions, as well as the ownership for each of those sites. Geographic location, latitude, longitude, If there is any association between the source and receiving sites, are they owned by the same owner? Are they operated by the same company? That will have to be disclosed on there as well. What are the actual activities that have occurred on the source site? You'll have to state what Schedule 2 activities were actually done on there. You will also have to provide the volume of soil to be relocated, and as well as the soil quality. So here's where you'll actually have to list what kind of testing did you do on there. At this point, there's no requirement to include a report with that, but you will have to justify how you did that soil sampling. Who must provide the notification? So that is on the responsibility of the source site. Typically it will be, well, technically it would rest with the property owner who's moving that soil because that soil belongs to them. But I think logistically it's going to be the excavation contractor or the trucking company that's actually moving that soil, because they will actually know where it's going and they'll be responsible for the logistics of moving that soil. So I think in the end that's who is going to end up filing those forms, probably with the help of a consultant like myself. And when do you have to do that? 2 weeks. That's your minimum. You can submit it earlier than that, but it has to be done a minimum of 2 weeks prior to moving that soil. And who receives the notification? So that would, as we discussed, be the Ministry of Environment, municipalities of both the source and receiving sites, as well as Indigenous nations with reserve lands or territories in around the source and receiving sites. And there are some radiuses that we will look at for that, but they're typically between 1 to 1.5 kilometers within those areas of reserve or territories that you'll have to notify nations. So what level of investigation is necessary? So there's kind of two parts to this. Number one is establishing that you have a Schedule 2 land use on your site. How do you figure that out? Many of you might be familiar with Phase 1 environmental site assessments, Phase 1 ESAs, Stage 1 PSIs, generally the same thing. So this is a desktop study that looks at the history and current uses of lands and determines what types of activities have occurred. And that is I think the benchmark for what the ministry will expect has been done for a person to be able to say yes or no, a Schedule 2 activity has occurred on the site. If you do have that Schedule 2 activity, then you are going to have to go ahead and assess your soil. And that means following the ministry's Technical Guidance 1 document on site investigation. So that's been around for a long time. Most consultants are very familiar with that and should be able to help you design a sampling program that will meet that requirement. And then at that point, you would have your data, compare it to the applicable standards, and then make a determination as to whether you do or do not have any contamination on your site. High volume receiving sites. So this is, as far as I know, a brand new definition that the ministry has created for fill sites. So these are not licensed landfills. These are fill sites that are accepting greater than 20,000 cubic meters of soil from Schedule 2 land use sites. So these could be existing fill sites, they could be new fill sites, but if this fill site wants to accept more than 20,000 cubic meters of soil from Schedule 2 land use sites, and it's not the same site, it can be multiple sites, but there is a maximum of 20,000 cubic meters at that fill site. If you want more than that, you are going to have to become a high volume receiving site and follow a very lengthy list of requirements to be considered a high volume receiving site. These include developing a soil management plan, which is available in that intentions paper in an appendix. It's a 2-page document, and it has quite a list of requirements to become a high volume receiving site in that soil management plan. It has to consider putting in a leachate collection system, various types of environmental studies to look at sensitive aquatic or terrestrial receptors. There are siting requirements as to how close your fill site can actually be to receptors such as aquatic water bodies, livestock, irrigation wells, drinking water wells, those sorts of things. So it will be quite an undertaking, I believe, for a lot of fill sites to become high volume receiving sites. And that's probably one of my biggest concerns with this new regulation, is that many fill sites will not want to go through that process, and therefore there will be a lack of these fill sites that can actually take soil from Schedule 2 land use sites, which will likely drive up the cost of disposing of soil and could potentially drive more soil to licensed treatment facilities, filling them up with what is essentially uncontaminated soil. So that's the gist of the regulation, and there's a lot of specifics in there, but I think we also need to stress that this is a draft document at this point. There are likely going to be changes made. The ministry had a comment period that ended on March 15th. For people to put in concerns after they had conducted 2 webinars in February about this, and I do know that they did receive quite a few comments. A lot of them had suggestions for changes and pointed out logistical challenges with this new regulation as far as construction activities and development projects go. So I do expect some changes to be made, but we'll have to wait and see what that final document looks like at the end.
Well, thank you so much, Travis, for giving us the overview. And I know there's a lot of questions and a lot of variants are going to be, people on our call today are going to have different questions based on the type of industry and the service they're providing. So I'm going to open up the questions for people to start asking. But first, I'm going to open it up to Mana from PhilConnect because she's already was familiar with what you were going to talk about and she had a few questions. So Mana, if you can please ask us your questions and then I'll open it up for others who want to share with the questions and the conversation. And we're also looking to hear maybe some tips that have not been shared in the document as well. So we're really trying to get different perspectives on this. So Mana, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Waida and Travis, for the presentation. That's very useful. So a couple of questions that I had is when are these changes coming into effect?
So a great question. We don't know. There had been indications that it would be later this year in the fall. However, the most recent rumors, I'll call them, coming out because there hasn't been anything definitive, is that it could be pushed into next year as the ministry tries to adapt this process to some of the logistical challenges of construction projects in general. So we don't know at this point, but it is certainly not imminent.
Okay. The other question is, I know some of our clients with PhilConnect, they connect to a receiving site or vice versa, and then sometimes these things are last minute, sometimes they know in advance. And what if they have to go to different receiving sites? So when you're excavating, you have a source that you have notified the ministry and indigenous nations and everybody else, and then you find something better, another place. Some of it goes one place, some of it goes another place. How do you manage that?
Yeah, really good questions. And I know that those were certainly comments that were provided to the ministry regarding logistical challenges because as we know who work in the development and construction industry, sometimes you got to switch up fill sites. Sometimes fill sites fill up. They can't take any more soil that day, and yet you've got 10 trucks you got to move off site. Unfortunately, there are no allowances for that right now. That 2-week minimum is a requirement. So, if you need to change a fill site on the fly, that is just not going to be possible. What I have heard from speaking to some of the excavation contractors that we deal with is that they may very well need to end up blanketing fill sites with a notice whether they actually intend to send soil there or not. One thing about this form is that there is no fee. So it's really just some time of filling out that information and submitting it. Unfortunately, I think this is going to result in a lot of paperwork going to municipalities' desks and First Nations desks to deal with, and they may not have the capacity to deal with that given the amount of development and construction that's going on, particularly in the Lower Mainland. So I think that is probably one area that the ministry is looking hard at as to how this process can work with the realities of construction and not overloading people with unnecessary paperwork. But we'll have to wait and see how that turns out.
Yeah, I could see that could create a lot of scheduling issues and
for sure. Yeah.
problems. And does this apply to residential sites? Like if they're excavating for building
Right.
a home?
Yeah, no, in general, it won't. I'll say there's probably a couple of rare exemptions to that where a residential property may be captured as a Schedule 2 use. The one that I can think of offhand is if a residential property has been impacted by contamination migrating from another source, that makes them a Schedule 2 activity. And therefore, then they would be captured under this system. But in general, if you've got single family, old apartment buildings, whatever that you're wanting to redevelop, you shouldn't be captured in this system. That's not the intent.
What about preload material?
Yeah, also there are exemptions for preload material. I don't expect preload to be captured. I think the ministry is aware of the valuable resource that preload is and that it does need to be moved around on and off site. So I don't think they're looking to capture preload.
And the gravel suppliers?
Yeah, so gravel quarries are an area that is a little unclear right now. I think some gravel quarries qualify as Schedule 2 uses because a lot of them might do their own maintenance on site. They may have storage tanks that they're using to fuel excavators on site, dump trucks, that kind of thing, which would bring them into a Schedule 2 category. And obviously, you can't be sampling every load of gravel quarry coming out of quarries or you're going to slow down the construction industry pretty significantly. So I expect that may be another area where some exemptions are created. At this point, there are none, but like I said, we'll have to wait to see how the final document shapes out.
And what happens if you can find a receiving site that can accept your soil?
Yeah, there is no easy answer to that. Unfortunately, it is a problem, and it could result in, like I said, soil being sent to licensed treatment facilities, where it is a much quicker approval process. You're just dealing with that facility, no other paperwork required. But of course, they're going to charge you more money because they have a finite amount of space, and they are typically supposed to be dealing with contaminated material. But I think that is what could happen, or you just might have to wait, and your construction project may be put on hold, and you'll have to postpone that movement until you can find a fill site that will accept your soil.
What about the transfer stations? So if you're taking material to a transfer station, either the quantity is small or you don't have your paperwork. Because right now, a lot of people do that, take them to a transfer station, and once they have the paperwork and all the tests, then from that it goes to commercial dump sites or contaminated sites, wherever it needs to go.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I actually haven't heard that one brought up in either of the webinars. So I would assume still, because you are moving soil, that is going to trigger a notification. And so at that point, I think your receiving site, the initial receiving site, would be that transfer station. And so then you would simply follow all of the other processes from your source site to the receiving site as far as notifying municipalities and First Nations.
And then again, from the transfer station to the dump site, again, you have to do another notice.
That's correct. Yeah. That's how I would interpret it anyways.
Yeah.
Thank you for the overview, Travis, and for the details questions, Mana. So I'm going to open it up now. I see that there are a few questions in the chat, so I'll let you take it over from there, Travis. If you can please check the chat for some more questions.
Yeah. So yeah, I see Todd's initial comment. Incredible amount of additional unnecessary red tape. I'll let that stand on its own. Has the ministry engaged industry on these changes? According to the ministry, they've been working on this and consulting for the past 5 years. So I would think that they would have engaged with industry, and they reportedly have. So. And then we have the next question from Josh there. This seems as if it is built for residential sized projects. So as we've discussed, it is designed for commercial and industrial activities as defined in Schedule 2. We're not trying to capture, it's not designed to capture residential projects. And then Todd's second question, what is the reasoning behind a leachate management system for the high volume fill sites for non-contaminated soils? I can't answer that, Todd, because I don't have the reasoning behind that. Does seem overbuilt. It is essentially what proper landfills deal with, who are taking actual waste. I think it is a conservative step. I believe some of this is dealt with because the volumes of soil, could be greater than 20,000 cubic meters. That's when your trigger for having to create a high volume receiving site is. And so because of those volumes, the CSR standards weren't necessarily designed for soils of that volume, to capture soils of that volume. So I think there is a bit of conservatism built into the systems and the soil management plan to account for that. So I see Brad has a question in there, Wida.
Okay, perfect. Please go ahead.
Has there been any talk of ongoing monitoring for high volume sites? And yes, absolutely there is. And that is in that appendix document within the soil management plan that has to be prepared for high volume sites, is the establishment of a monitoring network that would require ongoing monitoring as long as that high volume receiving site was operational. Certainly some ongoing costs, additional ongoing costs for high volume receiving sites. Rachel is asking, is there any mention of invasive plants in these regulations? I can think that would be the most important reason to regulate clean soil. Interesting question. I don't believe there is any requirement as far as when you're moving soil to do any sampling for invasive plants in that soil. I think a lot of the idea is that this soil is coming from below the superficial area that might have some organics in it, and therefore that's what we would be testing for. But maybe that is something that some comments have been put in and might be integrated into the initial or the final document. We'll have to wait and see. There certainly are some requirements as far as high volume receiving sites go for assessing what types of plant and animal life are around there for sensitive receptors. So that's just another study that has to be done if you want to set up a high volume receiving site.
Great questions coming in, and I'm glad to see that we had a good turnout today. So it's definitely a topic that is going to be affecting all of us, whether you're working on a small project, big project, or even the soil relocation affects every individual. How does the use of our tax money get spent? How does this affect our water supply, our food supply chain, and the cost of the real estate market? So sometimes it might seem like it's not our problem, but in reality, it's really everybody. It's a conversation we all need to be participating in, because it's kind of like, with healthcare, the ground is also kind of affects everyone from a health and a financial and industrial perspective. So let's see, I think there's one more comment coming in. Okay, we have some more questions.
So Stephen has asked, for sites with multiple land uses, will this affect, for example, moving RL plus soils from an RL area onto a CL land use area? So yeah, really great question. So first of all, you do have to go back to whether are you triggered into this, and that trigger is solely by, do you have a Schedule 2 land use on your site? So if you have a Schedule 2 land use, then you are going to have to follow this system and do your sampling. And then it is looking at the land use standards at the receiving site. So if that receiving site is able to take CL quality soil, then you will be able to transport that soil there under this agreement. But if that, if you're at waste quality soil, then, which is, IL plus above industrial land use, then you will not be able to send that anywhere other than a licensed treatment facility. We have disposal of waste rock in high volume, rock that doesn't apply to the BC CSR standards. Yeah, that's an interesting point, Todd. As far as I know, this is dealing with soil. So that is under the CSR definition of soil. So if you're dealing with rock, that is not going to be captured under this system. That's my understanding. Xavier, also related to invasive species, there are restrictions for soil movement from areas with Japanese beetle infestations. Will this new regime take that into consideration? Yeah, so certainly there are still even current requirements on sampling for that. I don't think this regulation is going to capture that because it is designed as a province-wide regulation. They don't want to be divvying it up into different regions or sections. So I'm I believe that the ministry would leave that type of restrictions to the municipalities or regional governments where it actually is an issue. Heather has asked, is the ministry expecting that all clean soils intended for off-site disposal be characterized via TG1 guidelines? Yes, if your site falls into this trigger, if you've had the Schedule 2 use, you will have to characterize your site according to Technical Guidance 1 requirements. Now, I think it's important to note that Technical Guidance 1 is not just about stockpile sampling. And in fact, most of it is about in situ, in-ground investigation. So that is not so much based on volumes, that's based on areas of your site. So if you have a really large site, you may want to assess that soil while it is still in the ground versus when it's in stockpiles, and you have to deal with it on a volume basis. I think that'll be the more expensive way to go. How far back are we supposed to go when deciding Schedule 2 uses? Yeah, good question, Xavier. Unfortunately, it's pretty much the same as if you were looking to get a regulatory instrument for your site. You're doing your phase 1, and that phase 1 is looking at what has occurred on that site as well as what is occurring, and there really is no time frame for when you have to stop looking back. So if you had a service station on your site 40 years ago, even though it's been a retail strip mall since then, you're still going to get captured under this system. And I think it's maybe useful to discuss a little bit or just mention a few examples of Schedule 2 activities because they are quite ranged. I mean, you've got things that are obvious like service stations, dry cleaners, but I mean, fire shooting ranges, any type of metal workshops, automotive repair, auto body repair, electrical battery manufacturing, recycling, bulk storage. I mean, there's a list of them. I won't go through all of them here, but they are quite comprehensive, and I think you'll be surprised at how many sites are going to be captured under this system, including the new Schedule 2 use that was added in February, which is contaminated soil or sediment storage, treatment, deposit, or disposal, which essentially means if you find contaminated soil on your site at some point, if that soil has been put there as fill material, for example, you are now a Schedule 2 use, and you will also be captured under this system.
All right, great questions are coming here, things that maybe we did not think about, but as you're digging deep, I can see that this is going to be a very deep topic, and it's going to affect each person in a different way, depending on the industry, depending on the land use, the size of the project, the location. There are many variables. So, but it is going to create a few more. I guess it means that there's going to be more planning on everybody's part. Wouldn't you say that, Travis?
Absolutely, it'll certainly require a lot closer relationship, I think, between consultants, transporters, as well as the fill sites. And I think the fill sites are going to be really key to how well this regulation rolls out. People can work with paper. We're used to dealing with different regulations, filing forms here and there. So I have every confidence that developers and contractors are going to be able to figure out the forms and where they need to be sent and whatnot. I think where the real issue could become here is the number of fill sites that are actually able to accept the soil coming from these Schedule 2 uses, because as we said, 20,000 cubic meters, that's your cap. Large scale development projects can be in the millions of cubic meters. So we know that these fill sites, there's going to have to be a lot of high volume receiving sites set up in order to service the existing construction industry. And based on the amount of work that's going to go into being certified as a high volume receiving site, I have a feeling a lot of fill sites are not going to want to undertake that work. And that is, again, gonna create a bit of a bottleneck in the amount of fill sites that can accept soil from, even shopping centers that have had a dry cleaner in it. That dry cleaner might have just been one tiny little retail space, but that entire site is going to get captured in that. The entire excavation is going to get captured in this system. So it is going to affect a lot more sites than I think some people might think that it's going to.
Yes, so it is sounding like there's so many more steps that are required. It's going to require more planning. It's going to any other things that maybe people could start planning for right now. Maybe just thinking of project planning, it's going to affect many people in the organization from a project planning perspective, or maybe estimation. I know, Mana, you are as well from a civil engineering perspective. So how do you, I guess it's going to require more planning and estimating, and collaboration as
Yes.
well.
Yes, definitely. So from the estimating and construction management, to do the planning way in advance, and the problem, that is sometimes the sites that you chose at the planning, they either get filled up because dump sites, they fill up, or whatever happens, some of them are seasonal, so that could create a problem if there's the start date of the project changes. That happens all the time.
Yeah.
It gets postponed, and you get into a season that the site that you had in mind at the planning stage is not available anymore.
Mhm.
So now you have to find something else, and
And at that point,
because
you
you
would have to,
have that,
you would have to
that 2
submit
weeks
new,
notice. Mm-hmm.
new forms, new 2-week waiting window. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see this being a problem, but so that's when you mentioned that blank. What is it? Blank permit or
blanketing,
blank?
blanketing multiple fill sites, which is going to
Yeah.
result in informing multiple municipalities and First Nations about soil that may actually not be moved there. But you kind of have to cover yourself and make sure you're
Yeah.
ready for it, and that will be what the planning is. So, it is just something. But I think there is still quite a bit of time here. Even once the regulation comes into effect, as the last ministry webinar that was done, some of the questions focused on, is there a grandfathering clause? And the answer was yes, there will be about a 6-month window is what they're looking at right now for industry to be able to review the final regulation, and then and so that it doesn't interfere with existing construction projects. Now, if your construction project is going to go beyond that 6-month window, you're going to have to figure out a way to adapt to this new process.
Yeah, so many variables and tips here. So thank you so much, Travis and Mana. I know we want to stay on time with the presentation, and there's probably going to be so many other questions. So I put the links to connect with Mana and Travis in the chat. Please do connect with Mana and Travis on LinkedIn or at the sites for other services. And we also would like to invite you to next month, Mana, if you can show us the next slide. Next month in July, we are going to be having a guest speaker, Isabel Alice O'Connell, and she's going to be talking about ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance. So if you're working on any large-scale projects, you're working especially with government projects, ESG is a big topic hot right now, and that's happening on July 7th. So we will be sharing some registrations for that. Otherwise, if you can show us the next slide, please, Mana, I'd like to invite you, if you have any area of expertise you would like to share, if you'd like to be the speaker as well, we are looking for people to share their knowledge and expertise, because really the only way we can solve this problem of the soil relocation and getting that collaboration and planning ahead, that especially all of the rules that Travis was telling us about today, is to all collaborate and work together. And this is where also services like PhilConnect can come in and help people with maybe solve some part of that issue as well. And if you have your own perspective, would like to invite you to be a speaker. So if you'd like to be a speaker of one of our events, just like today, we will host it for you and we will give you the platform, send the invites. Please connect with me on LinkedIn or at PhilConnect, and I'll arrange that with you. Otherwise, thank you so much, Travis, for taking the time today to share this expertise with us. And I'd invite... Here, I'll put the link in the chat, so please do connect with Travis and also with myself and Mana on LinkedIn. I think would be a great opportunity, or through the websites. And anything else you'd like to share, Travis or Mana, before we close up?
Yeah, just please do reach out to me. I do have a list where I'm updating clients and interested parties about any updates with this soil relocation. So if you'd like to be on that update, then please contact me and I'll put you on the list.
Wonderful. And Mana, anything, last words?
No, thank you, Travis. This was very informative and
You're welcome.
very useful for the industry. We would like to have you back again once these changes are implemented and
Yeah.
we see what was the final, decision on that. And then that, I think that would be also useful because some of these things that we talked about today may or may not be on the final.
Yeah.
So I think it would be good to have another one once this are finalized.
Absolutely. Happy to come back.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. So I'll bid you a happy day. Oh, I think something else in the chat just came in. All right. Thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Alex. Thank you all for
Welcome,
joining
Alex.
us. All right. Till next time. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.